Hello and welcome to another HanDrinksSolo wine info video. And today we are discussing Anura's Reserve Tempranillo 2019, which was voted as the Platter Hidden Gem Wine of the Year for 2022. Now this wine is an outlier from a whole number of angles, which we're going to discuss, but even outliers can teach us a little bit about how wines are made, how climate affects flavor, and even how the way you serve a wine will affect how you perceive that wine. So I'm going to start out by talking about what's in the glass. After that, I'm going to give you my bid for why I think this wine channels the spirit of Barossa Shiraz. And then after that, we'll discuss the identity of Tempranillo globally and how best to serve a high alcohol wine. But as per usual, you can click on the chapter markers in the video line below and watch this video in whatever order you want. So what should we expect from a Paarl Tempranillo? Well, Tempranillo is a fairly fast ripening grape. In fact, the word Tempranillo means early. Paarl is one of South Africa's warmest regions. So when you put a fast ripening grape into a warm region, you are pretty much guaranteed to get a big fruit forward wine. And that's exactly what we get. I mean, when I sniff this guy, I get these mental images in my mind of juicy blackberries and mulberries and plum juice running down someone's chin in slow motion. I mean, look, it is very possible that I watched too many liquid fruit commercials as a kid. But either way, the fruit is the main show on this particular guy. And then beyond the fruit, there are these elements of kind of black currant fruit pastel. And if you grew up in South Africa, do you remember the black sparkles, the boiled candy? There's definitely those elements going down. And then right towards the end, as the fruit, I guess, is outstripped by what is quite high alcohol, 15.7%, you get the spice. And it's almost presents as a kind of licorice element over and above the fruit and the candy. And at this point, you might ask, like, whoa, 15.7% Han, why all the alcohol? Because mostly in South Africa, we're not used to seeing anything over 14.5%, maybe 15 in rare occurrences. But around the world, and especially in the New World, wines over 15.5% are not that uncommon. In California, you can get white wines that register 15.5, especially in the Chardonnay category. And their Zinfandels, which these big, plummy, dense fruit bombs, can sometimes reach 16%. But for me, the spirit of Barossa is big in this glass. Barossa is a region in Australia that produces big bolshy Shirazes, and the combination of waves and waves of dense fruit and then that kind of spice element coming through is exactly what I'm getting in this wine. But enough sniffing, let's see what it tastes like. So as the nose has been promising for some time, there are waves and waves of black fruit element that roll across your tongue. The candy elements are there too, and just as we picked up on the nose, right on the finish, there's almost like a bitter licorice root that comes through over and above the fruit. So you might taste all this and go, well, okay, Han, is that what Tempranillo is supposed to taste like? And I'd say, well, the problem with that question is that the most definitive Tempranillo region in the world, which is Rioja in Spain, actually has a winemaking style that depends on the heavy use of American oak. And so all these classic telltale Tempranillo flavor notes like cinnamon and cedarwood and vanilla are often actually linked to the use of oak rather than to the fruit itself. And so answering the question of what makes a classic Tempranillo is quite difficult to answer. But there are some comparisons that we can make. For example, the fruit component in Riojan wines is often more about red fruit and berries and is a little more high-toned and has higher acidity. So when sipping on this big, bolshy, blue-fruited, spicy guy, you'd be forgiven in a blind tasting for perhaps guessing that this is in fact an Australian Shiraz and not a Tempranillo in the first place. And again, you might object, say, Han, why do you keep talking about Shiraz while sipping on a Tempranillo? And I'd say, well, largely because Tempranillo is still finding its way internationally. And there's not a lot of it being grown outside of Spain. And where it is grown, there are no rules with the winemaking, and it can be made in a whole number of different styles. And so when you ask, what does a classic new school Tempranillo taste like? It's not always easy to give a definitive answer. What's beautiful about that is that this particular example gets to be part of the conversation over how Tempranillo should or could express itself on a global scale. And while there is a trend away from high alcohol wines, there was a time when Robert Parker was all the rage, where the bigger the bolshier and the more fruit forward the wines were, the higher the scores it got. So we're almost out of time for today, but before I go, I want to just give a little note on serving high alcohol wines. So the first thing that you need to do with a high alcohol wine is decant. We've discussed before how alcohol is one of the most volatile elements in a wine. And so if you've got a super high alcohol wine, you may want to let some of that blow off, which happens really efficiently in a decanter that gives the wine a much bigger surface area. Secondly, I would say bring it down a degree or two before serving it. I'd recommend 16 degrees, even 15 degrees. And you may say, what? This is a big bolshy red. Why am I bringing it down? Well, as I said, alcohol is really volatile, and when you increase the temperature, you increase the volatility of the alcohol, which then, of course, doesn't allow the fruit components to shine quite as brightly. But don't take my word for it. Why not do a little experiment where you decant half the bottle and serve it cooler and serve the other straight from the bottle, and serve that as a blind tasting and see what your dinner guests have to say. Finally, if you have any questions about Tempranillo or about Paarl or about big Australian Shirazes in the 90s, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And if you're watching this on the HanDrinksSolo YouTube channel, then be sure to subscribe so that you can stay up to date with rising star winemakers, unusual cultivars, and some of the most exciting regions that are emerging in the South African winelands.